I lived for 2 weeks in the bottom of the sea, and you think about all the things that could be down there. And I saw right in front of me this huge eyeball, about the size of a saucer, staring, unblinking right at me. And I freaked out.
A fisherman barely escaping death after being dragged underwater by an octopus, a Navy officer's encounter with a prehistoric sea creature, strange lights spotted by a fisherman hovering off the coast of North Carolina. This footage here comes from C.R. Larkin on YouTube, who'd been fishing at Cape Lookout in North Carolina on November 13th, 2018, around 9 p.m. when he spotted these mysterious orange lights in the sky over the water. It's a solid piece of footage because the camera's almost totally stationary, so no nauseating shaky cam, and we get a nice long look at whatever these things are. Now, this is clearly not a satellite or a plane because the lights aren't gliding through the sky, they're just hovering there. And here's where it gets really strange. Initially it's just 2 lights, but then 2 more appear above. All 4 of them glimmer in the darkness for a bit, and then the ones on the bottom fade away. So just what the hell is going on here? In July of 1965, Captain Marvin McCamus and Captain Bill Rainey, both experienced Navy officers, were aboard the deep-sea submersible Alvin, conducting a routine check on the Artemis listening array in the Bahamas. They were diving in the infamous tongue of the ocean, a deep part of the ocean floor, over 1,500 meters or about 5,000 feet down. As they descended another 300 feet to follow a cable spanning a massive crevice, something strange caught their eye. McCamus thought the submersible was drifting along the cable, but then he noticed something odd, stating it wasn't the sub drifting, it was the object that was moving. What he saw next would leave him completely stunned. The object, which first appeared to be a utility pole, was actually alive. Going on to say, I was astonished to see a thick body with flippers, a long neck, and a snake-like head with 2 eyes looking right at us. It looked like a big lizard with flippers that had 2 sets of them, end quote. So what McCamus was looking at sounds a lot like a plesiosaur, an extinct marine reptile which people in various parts of the world have claimed to spot on rare occasions, most famously the Loch Ness Monster, for example. The creature swam away quickly and McCamus couldn't catch it on camera. His equipment was set to photograph objects within 15 to 25 feet, but the creature had already swum out of range. When McCamus surfaced and reported the encounter, people weren't really buying it. Obviously, he was just laughed off the deck by his fellow officers. McCamus later wrote in the wet log, but he believed it was deleted by the Navy and it never made it into the final records. But after hundreds of dives, McCamus insisted that he had never seen anything like it again. Alright, this is a crazy story. So in 1952, a fisherman named Gordon Hastie had a terrifying encounter off the coast of Pepin Island, New Zealand. It all started when his fishing line got stuck, so he jumped into the waist-deep water to free it. As he followed the line though, something suddenly grabbed hold of his ankle. Before he knew it, he was being dragged underwater. Then he was pulled into a deep hole, and to make things even worse, he could barely see because a thick black cloud of ink was obscuring his vision. He was under attack from an octopus, which wrapped its tentacles around him. Hastie fought back, desperate to free himself, but the thing had too strong a hold of him. But then Hastie remembered his blade. Through the chaos, he managed to pull it out and began slashing at the tentacles, and finally the octopus released its grip and Hastie swam to the surface, but he hadn't gotten out unscathed. He'd lost a small portion of his finger in the fight thanks to the octopus's sharp beak. Ever seen a shark eaten in one bite? Well, you're about to. Take a look at this. That was awesome, but terrifying all the same. This footage was captured by fishermen off the coast of Bonita Springs, Florida in August of 2014. They'd been reeling in a black-tipped shark when a Goliath grouper sprung out of the water and just snagged it. It's so freaky watching this shadowy form growing in the water. It's like you know something big is coming if it's bold enough to sneak up on a shark like that. And my god, does it look monstrous. The spines along its back, it almost looks like a living dinosaur. From Reddit user Thunderbird comes a story his friend told him about when he worked in the Navy. Not me, but a friend of mine worked on a submarine while in the Navy back in the 70s. His sub was participating in NATO naval war games exercises in the North Atlantic. Back then, most exercises were practicing warfare using scenarios involving Warsaw Pact foes. So naturally, the Soviets were monitoring this, including Soviet submarines that had snuck into the area. His crew saw a British sub return from sea with the front end broken off and the forward bulkhead exposed to the sea. One sailor from the sub told him that they had an underwater collision at speed with another submerged vessel. The problem is the bulkhead can seal out water under pressure, but it's not intended to withstand the force of the water as the sub moves through the water. The crew used wood timbers to brace the bulkhead and prevent collapse as they got underway. There were no corresponding reports from any other participants in the area. They were in deep water and there were no known obstacles. Their best guess is they hit a submerged Soviet sub sent to spy on them. Everyone was sworn to secrecy and nothing made it to the papers.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Captain George Drever's Sea Serpent. In 1875, Captain George Drever of the bark Pauline found himself at the center of one of the most gripping sea monster tales ever recorded. On July 8th, while navigating the vast expanse of the South Atlantic, Captain Drever and his crew witnessed an extraordinary battle unfolding on the ocean's surface. A colossal creature with a long, eel-like body stretching about 30 feet or 9 meters, and a large head topped with 2 dorsal fins, was entwined around a massive whale. The mysterious beast coiled itself tightly as the whale thrashed violently, sending waves crashing and hearts racing aboard the Pauline. The sheer intensity of the struggle left the crew in awe, and Captain Drever didn't let the moment slip into obscurity. He penned a detailed report and even sketched the creature, with his account later published in the Zoologist Journal. While modern interpretations suggest they might have just witnessed a giant squid engaging the whale, misidentified due to the distance and the tumultuous conditions, the vividness of Drever's description keeps the debate alive. Was it a misunderstood encounter or a genuine sea serpent? Either way, this remarkable incident adds a thrilling chapter to the lore of unbelievable sea monsters. In our number 4 spot today, we have the USS Stein incident. In 1978, the USS Stein, a Knox-class frigate of the US Navy, was cruising through the Pacific Ocean when something extraordinary happened. The ship's sonar system began malfunctioning, and when the crew investigated, they found the sonar dome, the protective cover beneath the ship, had been seriously damaged. Technicians were baffled to discover the dome was covered in long, sharp scratches with hooked, claw-like structures embedded in the rubber coating. These weren't marks from rocks or man-made objects. They seemed almost alive. Experts speculated that a giant squid, possibly a species larger than any previously recorded, had attacked the sonar dome, perhaps mistaking it for a rival or potential prey. This incident provided some of the most compelling physical evidence of encounters with massive, rarely seen marine creatures, and suggested that giant squids might be far more aggressive than anyone had thought. Could the depths of the ocean be hiding creatures even more mysterious and colossal than we have ever imagined? In our number 3 spot today, we have the Alecton sea serpent. In 1861, the crew of the French naval ship Alecton experienced something straight out of a sailor's legend. While navigating the waters off the coast of Tenerife in the Canary Islands, they spotted a massive creature surfacing nearby. It looked like a giant squid, estimated to be about 25 feet or 7.6 meters long, a beast many thought only existed in myths. The sailors, filled with a mix of fear and excitement, sprang into action. They hurled harpoons and opened fire, determined to capture this elusive titan of the deep. Despite their efforts, the creature slipped away, disappearing beneath the waves and leaving them empty-handed but forever changed. The captain didn't let the encounter fade into obscurity. He submitted a detailed report to the French Academy of Sciences. The incident became one of the first recorded encounters with a giant squid, helping to shift scientific scientific opinion towards accepting that these legendary creatures were, in fact, very real. In our number 2 spot today, we have the HMS Herald and the Sea Serpent. In 1857, the crew of the HMS Herald was charting the waters of the North Pacific near the Aleutian Islands when they experienced something that would make even the most seasoned sailor's heart skip a beat. Under the command of Captain Henry Mangles Denham, officers and crew, including the ship's naturalist, Berthold Seaman, they spotted an enormous sea creature breaking the surface of the calm, glassy water. This wasn't a mere glimpse. Conditions were perfect for observation. The creature was described as a gigantic serpent with a head resembling an oversized sea lion, complete with large, expressive eyes that seemed to study the ship just as intently as it was being watched. Its body stretched an estimated 60 feet or 18 meters long, undulating through the water with incredible speed and agility. At one point, it raised its head several feet above the waves, giving the uncanny impression of curiosity. The sighting was meticulously recorded in the ship's log and later detailed in Seaman's published works, adding a hefty dose of credibility to their account. This extraordinary encounter didn't just add another tale to sea serpent lore, it spurred genuine interest in marine exploration and the study of cryptozoology. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the St. Augustine Monster. In 1896, the peaceful sands of St. Augustine Beach in Florida became the stage for a maritime mystery that would captivate the nation. 2 young boys, Herbert Coles and Dunham Corbett, came across a massive carcass washed ashore, a discovery that was anything but ordinary. This enormous, unidentified mass stretched about 18 feet or 5.5 meters long and weighed an estimated 5 tons. It had a rubbery, fibrous texture and seemed to sport multiple arms or tentacles, leading excited locals to dub it the giant octopus. Intrigued, Dr. DeWitt Webb, founder of the St. Augustine Historical Society and Institute of Science, examined the bizarre find. He took samples and sent them off to the Smithsonian Institution, where initial examinations by Professor Addison Emery Verrill suggested it could be the remains of a giant squid or octopus. The possibility of a real-life sea monster set imaginations ablaze. However, skepticism grew over time due to the lack of definitive anatomical features. In 1971 and again in 1995, advanced analyses revealed that the mysterious carcass was likely decomposed whale blubber, specifically from a sperm whale. Despite the scientific explanation, the St. Augustine monster became one of the most famous globster cases, a term for unidentified organic masses that wash up on shores. This incident not only fueled public fascination with sea monsters, but also highlighted how the ocean's secrets can blur the line between myth and reality. Next, we are talking about the battle. A Texas fisherman got a nasty surprise when the fish on his line came with a bonus: a snake wrapped around it in a death grip. As if hooking your dinner weren't enough, seeing a hungry serpent ready to chow down raises the question, who's actually in control here? The fisherman decided to play referee, using a knife to separate snake from fish. He then released them both, but not before earning bragging rights for the catch of the day. Talk about tension on the water. Reeling in a snake and a fish at the same time is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime event most anglers hope they'll never repeat. In our number 3 spot today, we have a literal grenade. Nobody expects a day out at the river to end with a bomb squad call, but that's exactly what happened when a fisherman in Gary, Indiana, hooked something suspicious from the murky depths of the Little Calumet River. Instead of a prize catch, he reeled in what looked like an explosive device. Local authorities weren't taking any chances. They shut down the nearest bridge and called in experts to investigate. While details remained scarce, the fisherman's day veered from calm casting to nerve-rattling drama in seconds. If you thought pulling up old boots were the worst that could happen, well, think again. Next, we are talking about this ancient discovery. A quick cast into an Irish lake turned into a step back in time when a fisherman brought up a pair of massive antlers. These ancient horns sparked plenty of local speculation. Monstrous lake creature? Some supernatural beast from Gaelic folklore? Turns out the fear factor was all in our imaginations. Experts identified the remains as belonging to a 10,000-year-old giant elk. Though not exactly a water-dwelling terror, stumbling upon relics of an extinct megafauna can still jolt the nerves, especially before science steps in with logical answers. In another era, this find might have fueled campfire stories for generations. And finally, ending off our list today, we have a giant seahorse. In the tropical waters off Australia's coast, two fishermen were left stunned when they brought up a fish that looked like a cross between a seahorse and a serpent. One look at its horse-like head and slender body, capable of growing up to 8 meters long, was enough to start a frenzy on social media, with people calling it a giant seahorse or, quote, something out of a fantasy film. Turns out it was an oarfish. Oarfish rarely surface alive since they dwell in deep waters below 250 meters, so most encounters involve a dead specimen washed ashore. That rarity has spawned countless myths, including the eerie belief that they herald disasters, earning them the nickname doomsday fish. Scientists think these shimmering giants might even be the real-life inspiration for sea serpent legends. If you're out on a boat and an oarfish suddenly appears, you can bet everyone will be reaching for their phones, and maybe also saying a quick prayer or two, just in case. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the U-28 creature. During World War I, on a day that defied all logic, the German submarine U-28 sank the British steamer SS Iberian off the coast of Ireland. As the crew watched the ship disappear beneath the waves, an underwater explosion suddenly blasted a colossal creature into the air. This wasn't a figment of weary sailors' imaginations. The creature resembled a giant crocodile about 60 feet long, complete with 4 limbs and a long, pointed tail. For a fleeting 10 to 15 seconds, the stunned crew stood in awe as this marine behemoth arced above the sea before vanishing into the depths. The captain's account, published years later in 1935, sparked controversy due to the lack of corroborating evidence and the decades-long silence. But whether myth or reality, his story adds a thrilling chapter to the tales of unbelievable sea monsters that sailors swore were real. Could the oceans still hide such mysteries? In our number 9 spot today, we have the Gloucester sea serpent. Back in the summer of 1817, in the quiet town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, it was buzzing with tales that would make any sailor's hair stand on end. Hundreds of fishermen, sailors, and townsfolk claimed they saw a massive sea serpent slithering through the harbor's waters. This wasn't just a fish story. The creature was said to be over 100 feet long, sporting a series of humps and a snake-like head that looked oddly like a mix between a turtle and a horse, which I'm not really sure what that would look like. It moved with a graceful yet eerie serpentine motion and was even spotted coiled up at times. The excitement and fear were so real that the Linnean Society of New England jumped in, forming a committee to get to the bottom of it. They collected eyewitness accounts and even examined what they thought was a baby sea serpent, which unfortunately just turned out to be a deformed black snake. Despite the setback, the Gloucester sea serpent became one of the most well-documented sea monster sightings in American history. So, were all of these folks just seeing things, or was there really something colossal lurking beneath the waves? In our number 8 spot today, we have the HMS Plumper Sea Serpent. In 1857, the crew of the HMS Plumper, led by Captain George Henry Richards, had an encounter that would etch itself into maritime legend. While charting the waters off Vancouver Island, British Columbia, sailors spotted something extraordinary slicing through the waves. It was an enormous creature, estimated to be a staggering 100 feet long, with a head resembling a dog's and large, unsettling eyes that seemed to observe them just as keenly. Humps rose along its massive back as it moved swiftly against the current, defying everything they knew about sea creatures. The sight was so compelling that Captain Richards documented it in his official logs, and local newspapers quickly picked up the story. This wasn't just sailors' lore whispered over grog. It was a well-recorded event that added a thrilling chapter to sea serpent tales along the Pacific Northwest coast. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Valhalla sea serpent. In 1905, while sailing off the coast of Brazil aboard the yacht Valhalla, naturalists Edmund Meade Waldo and Michael J. Nicol experienced a moment that felt like stepping into a living legend. They spotted an unusual creature cutting through the water. A large fin rose about 6 feet above the waves, and atop that, a long neck extended another 8 feet into the air. The animal moved steadily, its mysterious form captivating the two men as it glided silently before disappearing after a few minutes. What makes this sighting particularly compelling is who these observers were. Both Meade Waldo and Nicol were respected fellows of the Zoological Society of London. Their detailed account was published in the Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London, igniting widespread discussions about the unknown marvels lurking beneath the ocean's surface. Could this have been a real-life sea serpent? A creature sailors had whispered about for centuries? In our number 6 spot today, we have the Monongahela sea serpent. In 1852, the American clipper ship Monongahela, under the command of Captain John Meny, became the center of one of the most astonishing sea tales ever recounted. While sailing through the remote stretches of the South Pacific, the crew reportedly harpooned and killed an enormous sea serpent. This wasn't just any sea creature. The beast was said to be over 100 feet long, with a head resembling an alligator and a body cloaked in glistening scales. The sailors managed to secure the massive carcass alongside their ship, likely imagining the sensation it would cause back home. But destiny took a dramatic twist. Before they could reach port, a fierce storm rolled in, and with it, their colossal catch was swept back into the abyss. News of their incredible encounter hit the newspapers, stirring up a mix of excitement and doubt. Lacking any physical proof, many people questioned the veracity of their story, suggesting it might have been an oversized sea snake or perhaps just an exaggerated fisherman's yarn. Nonetheless, the tale of the sea serpent remains one of the most intriguing accounts of unbelievable sea monsters that old sailors claimed were real. Who knows? Maybe the ocean still guards secrets that are yet to surface.
There's said to be a terrifying creature lurking off the coast of Mexico's Baja California peninsula, and it's known as the black demon shark. It was first spotted in 2008, and ever since there have been a number of reports from local fishermen who claim to have seen this enormous shark lurking in the deep. But what sets this shark apart? Why does it have such an ominous nickname? Well, first of all, it's big. The black demon is said to range anywhere from 20 to 60 feet long, estimated to weigh in at 50 to 100,000 pounds. It's often described looking like a great white shark, except it's much darker, almost black, and it's said to have an unusually large tail. Locals aren't sure what to make of it. Some think it could be a surviving megalodon. Others believe it might just be an unusually large great white, or perhaps there's actually more than one, an undiscovered species of shark. There have been expeditions to find the mysterious beast. It was even featured on an episode of Monster Quest, but no solid proof has ever been found. In 1608, explorer Henry Hudson was navigating the cold northern waters off Norway when he wrote about a very strange encounter he and his crew came across: a group of mermaids. They were as big as the men, he wrote, with very white skin and long dark hair. As Hudson described it, the mermaids' tails resembled those of dolphins, but with the distinctive spots of a mackerel. He seemed genuinely excited about the sighting, detailing the encounter in vivid detail. Now, of course, sailors in those days did like spinning tales, and some of them were clearly embellished. Some people looking back figured that Hudson may have just mistaken some other sea creatures like manatees for the mermaid creatures, but Hudson's sighting is especially strange because he was sailing in the Bering Sea near Norway, where there are no manatees. So could he have been seeing something else entirely? Naturalist Philip Henry Goss, writing in the 1800s, argued that Hudson wasn't just mistaking an animal for a mermaid. Goss believed Hudson, being an experienced sailor, would have been able to recognize any local marine life. Instead, he figured that Hudson might have just fabricated the whole story, or maybe, just maybe, he and his crew actually encountered something unknown at that time, or even now. Lamprey eels. Whoever encountered one of these things back in the day must have been terrified. These things are pretty nightmarish. They're ancient, prehistoric levels of old. They've been swimming Earth's waters for over 360 million years, surviving all sorts of changes to the planet. They have a circular toothed mouth that they use to attach to other fish and feed on their BLOOD and other bodily fluids. They're basically like underwater vampires. Really freaky creatures. They also remind me of massive sized slugs, but with razor sharp teeth. Not fun. Some lamprey species are parasitic, others are non-parasitic, mostly consuming small invertebrates. They use their sharp disc-like mouths to anchor onto their victims, and once attached they drill into the fish kinda and then just start slurping away. These things start as tiny blind larvae in rivers, then grow into larger predators that live in the ocean before finally returning to freshwater to lay eggs before dying. So they have a pretty bizarre life cycle as well. Now, this doesn't look real, does it? I mean, this has to be photoshopped, right? Well, it's not. Just a couple months ago, two young fishermen in Australia made a catch so rare it left locals completely stunned. They hauled in a giant oarfish, a creature that's incredibly hard to spot in the wild. Professor Cullum Brown from Macquarie University stated that there are only 3 species, with the giant oarfish growing to 8 meters in length. These sea monsters are rarely seen, mainly because they live in deep waters, usually 250 meters or about 820 feet below the surface. And finally, let's talk about a really weird creature called the hagfish. Yeah, just look at this thing. Looks like something that could totally be from another planet. A planet I'd rather not visit, thank you very much. First off, they look really strange, but they're also living slime factories. When threatened, hagfish produce this goo from specialized glands. And I'm not just talking about a little bit, I mean, it really is a surprising amount. The slime is like a defensive power for them. It clogs the gills of predators, giving the hagfish a chance to make a quick escape. And honestly, it really is like that scene from South Park where like Randy's dad's like, "It's a ghost, it slimed me," which I can't really go into detail on for obvious reasons, but just looking at this footage, yeah, it looks very similar. Now, when it comes to eating, things get really gruesome. They're scavengers with a taste for the expired. A dead fish lying on the ocean floor, along comes the hagfish. They burrow into the carcass, tying themselves into a knot to get better leverage, and then they devour their meal from the inside out. Hagfish don't have true jaws. Instead, they have a raspy tongue-like structure that they use to scrape off bits of their prey, almost like they have a built-in cheese grater for a mouth. It's pretty nuts.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Phronema. Meet one of the ocean's most inscrutable creatures, Phronema. This barbaric little parasite has earned its place in deep-sea horror stories for the way it creates a mobile nursery for its young. How, you ask? By hijacking an unfortunate salp, turning it into a hollow barrel, and crawling inside to navigate the ocean, food and water at the ready. Often linked to the chest-bursting xenomorph from the Alien franchise, this open ocean parasite carves out the insides of jelly-like salps, transforming its victim into a barrel-shaped pram. Hunkering down in this hollowed-out home, they then drift through the water, protected from predators, and conveniently stocked with a roomy nursery for its offspring. Scientists have debated whether the salp remains truly alive during its forced retirement as a floating hostel, but one thing is certain: the host's insides are pretty much stripped away. Male Phronema even tote around their own barrels, possibly to attract mates. Whatever the reason, it is a chilling reminder that life in the deep can be far stranger and more horrifying than anything we dream up for the big screen. Next, we are talking about the alien eel. Nobody goes fishing expecting to face a mouthful of nightmares, but that's what happened to one angler in New York's Hudson Valley. He yanked an eel-like beast out of the water, only to discover a round, suction cup mouth filled with concentric rows of razor-sharp teeth. That aquatic horror show turned out to be a sea lamprey, a parasitic creature that latches onto other fish, punctures their skin, and drains their fluids. The fisherman's reaction was simple and blunt. weirdest thing I've ever caught. After seeing the unsettling photos, the internet couldn't agree more, with plenty of people likening it to an alien from a sci-fi movie. It is just safe to say that this is one species no one wants to tangle with again. Next, we are talking about the long-nosed creature. Deep in the cold waters off of Newfoundland in Canada, a fisherman hauled up something that looked more like a mutant cartoon character than a fish. With a floppy, rubbery snout and what seemed like wings on its sides, the catch was almost too bizarre to believe. The baffled crew initially guessed it might be a platypus, until marine biologists identified it as a long-nosed chimera. These cartilaginous cousins of sharks and rays are rarely seen because they lurk in deep, dark waters up to 3,000 meters down. They even come equipped with a venomous spine, which means anyone who accidentally reels one in should handle it with extreme caution. For this fisherman, it was enough weirdness to last a lifetime. Next, we are talking about the mysterious Canadian creature. Some mysteries remain unsolved for years, just like the bizarre fish caught in 2009 from a vast underwater canyon off Nova Scotia called the Gully. This dark brown creature had an oversized head, curved teeth, and eyes so small they barely even seemed functional. Scientists tried to identify it through DNA analysis and got only a big, shrugging no match. Fast forward over a decade when researchers exploring the mid-Atlantic ridge reeled in similar specimens and finally cracked the code. A new species of whalefish. Living in the midnight zone over 3,300 feet deep, these fish probably don't see much, literally, as their tiny eyes lack lenses, but they sure left scientists with a fascinating deep-sea puzzle that took 15 years to solve. Next, we are talking about the sea pencil. Off the coast of Victoria, Australia, an angler lifted a creature so odd, social media users couldn't stop coming up with wild guesses. Its elongated, ribbed body ended in a bright orange hook, and the more you stared at it, the more alien it seemed. Enter the sea pencil, an invertebrate from the same group as corals and sea anemones. It spends most of its life partially buried in the sea floor, filter feeding for tasty particles. Experts say it can reach lengths of up to 46 centimeters, but nobody really expects you to casually reel one in. When you're fishing for standard fare like snapper, finding a living writing utensil from the ocean is definitely not on the wish list. Coming in at our halfway mark, we have shark versus shark. Battling a monster fish for over 4 hours sounds like a dream come true to most anglers, until you discover something else is gnawing on your hard-earned catch. Off the coast of Australia, 2 fishermen were reeling in what felt like a massive swordfish, only to learn it was actually a thresher shark being eaten alive by an even larger predator. By the time they hauled in the half-devoured shark onto the boat, there was hardly any torso left. While they suspected other sharks or possibly a giant squid, the real culprit remains a mystery. It is definitely a brutal reminder that in the ocean, there is always something bigger lurking in the depths, ready to snatch your trophy right off the hook.
So, news of this just came out yesterday at the time of this recording. It was supposed to be a normal day of fishing for Philip Morfin, but then he reeled in something horrific. At a pond in West Valley City, Utah, Morfin was checking the shoreline when he spotted something that looked like a skull. First he thought it was from an animal, but then he looked closer and noticed the unmistakable human eye sockets staring back at him. Morfin immediately contacted the police, and when they arrived, they confirmed that it was indeed a human skull. And when they continued searching the area, they found more bones, some partially submerged in the water. Investigators haven't determined the identity of the bones or how long the remains have been there. As of now, the case is still under investigation, with forensic teams working to piece things together. So whether this was an accident or foul play, it's still unknown. This next case is also super recent. News just came out earlier this month. So on March 7th, a group of fishermen were out about 40 miles off the coast of Boston. They were hauling in their nets when they realized there was something tangled in their gear. It wasn't a fish, it was the last thing anyone would want to find, a wrapped up, decomposing body. They immediately contacted the US Coast Guard, and the Massachusetts State Police took over the investigation. They didn't know who the person was, how they ended up in the water, or even how long they'd been there. As one official put it, no conclusions at this point. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is conducting an autopsy. That may help provide some answers. Well, those answers came a few days later. Turns out the body actually belonged to a woman in her 60s who'd been embalmed and had cancerous tumors. That detail changed everything. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office determined she'd been legally buried at sea, which is actually allowed under certain conditions. So they closed the case, calling it non-suspicious. But that doesn't make it any less grim. Russian fisherman Roman Fedortsov has seen things most of us wouldn't believe. Bizarre deep-sea creatures that look like they were spawned from an alien. And, well, take a look at this freaky thing. Yeah, just what in the hell is that? Turns out this is a creature called a smooth lumpsucker, and I don't think there's ever been a time where an animal's name has fit so perfectly. When Fedortsov pulled it up, he did what he always does. He snapped some pictures and a video and posted it on Instagram, where people immediately started comparing it to everything from sci-fi aliens to mutated Pokemon. The fisherman who works on a trawler based out of Murmansk regularly shares his discoveries from the deep sea, where the pressure is high, the light is almost non-existent, and evolution has taken some seriously weird turns, as you can see. Now, many of these creatures suffer from barotrauma when brought to the surface, meaning their eyes bulge, their bodies swell up, and their organs sometimes just explode, and that's why some of them look weirder out of the water than they do in their natural habitat. So imagine pulling up a shark, a pretty decent catch, but then when you cut into it, you find something absolutely horrifying inside. Well, in 2024, fishermen in East Timor hauled in a shark. When they cut it open, they made a gruesome discovery. There were human remains in its stomach. According to reports, the body parts were suspected to belong to an American tourist who'd gone missing during a diving trip in Indonesia. The tourist had been swept away by strong currents. Now, this isn't the first time sharks have been found with human remains inside, but it never gets any less disturbing. These predators don't typically hunt humans, but if a body ends up in the water, a shark isn't going to pass up an easy meal. In 2022, a deep-sea angler in Australia named Trapman Bermagui was reeling in his line from about 2,130 feet down when he pulled up a shark with huge, bulging eyes, rough sandpaper-like skin, and a mouth full of exposed teeth. It was sort of grinning like the shark from Finding Nemo. People online were amazed by this one. One commenter said the image was the stuff of nightmares. Another said the shark's evil smile gave them major creeps, and nobody could agree on what kind of shark it actually was, because it's the internet, and it's 2026. Nobody can even agree on the color red being red these days, let alone what kind of rare shark is hauled up from deep underwater. The fisherman insisted it was a type of rough-skinned shark, also known as an endeavor dogfish, saying it's common in depths greater than 600 meters, but another researcher said it might be a deep-water kite-fin shark. Whatever it was, seeing a creature like this pulled up from the deep is a reminder that most of what lives down there is still almost alien to us. This next Redditor said, "I've been fishing for 20 years, and I still can't explain what we hauled up last week. We were working a deep water stretch about 150 miles off the coast. The hull felt heavy, like we'd snagged a piece of shipwreck. But when we finally got the net onto deck, it wasn't scrap metal. It was a large, heavy ball of tightly woven copper wire, roughly the size of a tractor tire. It looked man-made, but there were no bolts, welds, or seams. Inside the mesh was a solid core of what looked like black glass or polished stone. Even though it had been sitting in the salt water, it was completely clean. No seaweed, barnacles, or slime. And it was a scorching day. The deck was hot enough to burn your feet through thin boots. When I brushed my hands against this thing, it felt like pulling a tray out of a deep freezer, and it stayed freezing cold for the 3 hours it sat on deck. Whenever we got close to it, our handheld radios would just kick over to static. My captain didn't like the look of it. We ended up winching it back over the side just to get our electronics working again." There have been stories about the Hawkesbury River in New South Wales for a long time. Reports go all the way back to the early 1800s of a mysterious creature lurking in the water, and the description has barely changed over the years. People say it looks a lot like Nessie. Long neck, bulky body, with 4 flippers. The natives were talking about the creature long before European settlers arrived. They warned newcomers to be careful near the edge of the river and spoke about a dangerous being living in the water. There's also Aboriginal rock art in the area. It's around 3,000 years old, showing a long-necked animal that lines up almost perfectly with the descriptions people still give today. But one of the most unsettling stories comes from the 80s. A fisherman was moving along the Hawkesbury in a small aluminum boat when the water around him suddenly darkened, and then it started to churn. He said the surface rippled like something huge was rising from below. And before he could react, something slammed into the bottom of the boat. The impact was so strong it launched it 6 feet into the air. The fisherman was thrown into the river and immediately started swimming for shore. He said the creature followed him at first, closing the distance before suddenly veering off and diving back down into the water. He made it to land, shaken but alive, and never went back on that stretch of river again. Back in 1976, a U.S. Navy torpedo recovery ship was out at sea doing routine research work, dragging a big cargo parachute through the water. At some point, the crew realized they'd hooked onto something huge. Whatever was attached to the chute started pulling back, hard enough that the ship was actually struggling to reel it in, and for a while they were just in this tug of war with some massive creature down there. But then, without warning, the resistance stopped. When they finally hauled the parachute back up, they found the reason. A massive shark had gotten tangled in it and suffocated after swallowing part of the chute. But as soon as the crew got a good look, they realized this was not any shark that they recognized. It didn't match anything in the books. The mouth was enormous, the body shape was strange, it looked completely different from great whites or basking sharks. It's around 15 feet long and weighed roughly 750 pounds. Turned out, it was actually an entirely new species. That accidental catch became the very first known example of what we now call the megamouth shark. Sightings of these sharks are still very rare, but we know they exist now. Since the first one was pulled up by sheer accident in 1976, fewer than about 100 megamouth sharks have ever been documented worldwide. One day on the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, a commercial fishing crew pulled up this bizarre-looking fish. They were hauling nets down deep, hundreds of meters beneath the surface, when a weird, almost alien-looking fish came up tangled in their catch. The first man who spotted it was Gary Goodyear, and when the strange creature first appeared on deck, he was like, "Good God, what the heck is that?" At first, nobody on the boat could name it. One guy even thought the fish's beak-like snout made it look like a platypus. Goodyear described its nose as almost like rubber, and no one knew what to make of the thing as it flopped on deck. It turned out the weird catch was a long-nosed chimera, a deep-sea fish related to sharks and rays that normally stays way below where fishermen usually fish. They have these strange bulging eyes and weird body shape because of how they evolved to live in the deep darkness. Because they had no idea what they were dealing with though, they almost hurt themselves. They were picking the thing up with their bare hands, unaware that these fish have venomous spines. Back in September 2018, 2 Irish fishermen were out at a big freshwater lake in Northern Ireland. At one point, they tugged on a fishing net and thought it was caught on a log, but as they hauled it up, they realized it was something much bigger. What they pulled out was the skull and massive antlers of what turned out to be a giant extinct deer, known as the Irish elk. These animals died out around 10,500 years ago. Their remains are incredibly rare to find intact like this. One of the fishermen, Charlie Coyle, later described his first reaction, saying, "I thought it was the devil himself. I was going to throw it back. I didn't even know what to do with it." The antlers on this ancient beast were more than 6 feet wide, and the animal itself would have stood about 6.5 feet tall. In the spring of 2024, a couple in Queens, New York went out to do some magnet fishing. James Kane and his partner Barbie Agostini were pulling their magnet out of a lake when it latched onto something heavy. It wasn't junk, it wasn't a bike, it was a metal safe. Now, being that it was sitting at the bottom of the lake, they weren't really expecting to find much inside, but they did. Inside that safe was hundreds of soggy $100 bills. The total was around $100,000. When they opened the safe and saw the cash, they screamed. Barbie didn't believe it at first, but once she saw the security ribbons on the notes, she was ecstatic. Next, they did something that I'd never do in a million years. They called the police to make sure everything was above board. The NYPD told them there was no evidence the money was tied to some crime and there was no way to identify the original owner, so the couple was cleared to keep it. Not a step I'd have bothered taking, but kudos to them, I guess. In 2005, a Dutch fishing boat dragged up something strange from the bottom of the North Sea. Caught in the net was a bison rib, but what made it stand out immediately were the carved zigzags running across the surface. This wasn't damage from the ocean or fishing gear. Someone had deliberately etched the pattern into the bone. When researchers got to studying it, they found that the bone dated back roughly 13,500 500 years, making it the oldest known piece of artwork ever found in the Netherlands. Back then, this part of the North Sea wasn't water at all. It was dry land. Now, what's really cool about this particular piece of ancient art is it actually tells us a little something about the person who carved into it. Archaeologist Luc Amkreutz described the carving by saying it was, quote, very precise to start with, but a bit haphazard towards the end, as if the person doing the carving lost interest.
A massive sea creature spanning the lengths of over 2 full-grown adults is next on the list, and it is the giant oarfish, also known as the doomsday fish, as it is said to appear as a messenger from the depths right before large tsunamis or earthquakes. The animal, which is said to have been the inspiration behind many sailors' tales of sea serpents, was discovered washed up on the shores of Catalina Island in Los Angeles by Ali McAlly in 2019. A strange occurrence, as the large creatures are commonly observed trolling along the deep sea floor, so seeing the creature washed up on the sand was baffling to say the least. While this particular oarfish is not the longest to have ever been observed, that one was actually 36 feet long, it is extremely large and quite rare, coming in at a length between 14 and 17 feet. Next, we have an animal that I personally definitely would not want to have caught up in my line. Caught in Port Isabel, Texas in 2020 by Alyssa Ramirez while fishing off of her pier. At first, the animal appeared to be nothing more than a pile of seaweed, but upon closer visual inspection, keyword being visual, Ramirez quickly realized that that was not the case. The animal was in fact later identified as a poisonous bearded fireworm. So it's a really good thing that Alyssa recognized the warning signs and did not try to touch the animal. Otherwise, she would have been stung with a powerful neurotoxin, leaving the area of contact feeling like it was on fire for hours. Up next, we have this weird thing. Captured in 2018 off of a fishing pier in Coney Island by Natalia Vorobach and documented on her TikTok. That thing almost doesn't even look real. What appears to be some kind of alien generated a lot of interest from the public, many excited at the possibility of being one of the first few people to view a documented new species. However, this excitement was dampened when scientists claimed the animal to be a clear-nosed skate, a species of, again bear with me, cartilaginous fish with a triangle-shaped flattened body and 2 dorsal fins on either side of the tail. So basically they described the complete opposite of what Vorobach caught. I don't know, you guys, are we thinking possibly an alien cover-up? Also, let me know the coolest thing that you've ever caught while out in the water. I think mine would probably be a pufferfish, but I want to hear yours too. Next, we have an unidentified furry-eyed fish caught during a February 2019 fishing expedition by a YouTuber who goes by the name of Thai Pig Patrol. The fisherman pulled the alien-looking creature lined with spines and spikes onto a small fishing boat while trolling the waters of a small murky river in Colombia. Thai had originally set out to find some catfish and was absolutely shocked at what he reeled in instead, describing it as the strangest fish he'd ever seen in his life, with his friends saying, "What the hell is that? This is the ugliest creature I've ever seen." Kind of harsh, but okay. Viewers of the video did identify the fish as an albino Acanthicus hystrix, a species of armored catfish generally found in rock or gravel bottom channels with moderate to strong currents. And finally, we have honestly probably the cutest creepy thing I've ever seen. I mean, it looks like it was made in a special effects lab, but its legitimacy was confirmed by National Geographic, NBC, and Forbes, along with a few other outlets. The discovery was made on October 10th of 2020 by a group of fishermen after a dead adult shark became caught up in one of their nets. Inside the stomach was 3 baby sharks, 2 of which were pretty standard, but the third was anything but. Similar to one found off of Mexico by a group of Indonesian fishermen in 2011, this was an albino cyclops shark. The shark was later turned over to local marine officials to be studied and is also one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
What would you do if you found a decomposing body while out fishing in a river? A Redditor by the name of Sherbak had this to say. "My friend told me about how he was fishing at a lake where he saw some bones that looked like a rib cage of some kind of animal. He thought it was a deer or something, but then he noticed a towel over the head, so he lifted it up and it turned out to be a person. There was still flesh on the head because the towel somewhat preserved it, but the rest of the body was mostly bone. He took some photos of it and reported it. He was questioned by the FBI for about 2 hours. Turns out it was a little girl, but he never found out anything else about the case. Fast forward 2 years later, and this same friend is fishing along a bank late at night when he hears two Spanish-speaking men approach, saying something along the lines of, "I'm going to show you how to do it so you know next time. Nobody will ever catch up." Followed by a loud splash in the water. Since it was very dark, they didn't know he was there. He was super still and quiet, not to alert them. When they left, though, he reported what he presumed was the dumping of a body. He had to go back to the same FBI building, and they basically said to him, "So 2 years ago you found a dead body and now you're back?" The Redditor then went on to say that his friend never found out any more details about the case, but wow, that is some serious courage. Reporting two separate bodies in a river while out on a casual fishing trip, that would make you seem pretty suspicious. In September of 2021, two kayakers were paddling along the Minnesota River when they came across something pretty disturbing: a partial human skull. There had been a drought, so the bone was easier to see sticking out of the riverbank. Now, there was also an active missing persons case going on at the time, and authorities thought that this skull may have belonged to them. They handed it over to the Midwest Medical Examiner's office, and eventually the FBI got involved. After some forensic analysis, turned out this was not a fresh skull. It belonged to a young man, but one who had died a very, very long time ago. This guy was roaming the earth around 5,500 and 6,000 BC, making this skull about 8,000 years old. It had a noticeable depression, looked like he'd suffered some kind of blunt force trauma. Since 2007, random human feet have been washing up on the shores of British Columbia and Washington State, still in sneakers. Just feet though, no body. It's exactly as weird as it sounds. It started out with one foot, then another one showed up not long after, and another. As of now, there have been over 20 separate feet found. Most of them are right feet as well. Some match each other, most don't. Naturally, people started freaking out. Was there a serial killer lurking around? Was there organ trafficking going on? Well, according to authorities, most of the feet seem to belong to people who were either in accidents or went missing, but no foul play, supposedly. The theory is that when a body ends up in the water, it can break apart over time. Sneakers, especially modern ones, float, so the feet just drift in. That being said, it still doesn't totally explain why they keep turning up in that same general area. It's weird. It's just creepy. And while the cops say there's nothing to worry about, it doesn't really detract from how grim this is. Every so often, something absolutely disgusting washes up on a beach and no one knows what the hell it is. I'm not talking about feet here. I'm talking about mystery blobs that have been nicknamed globsters, and they've shown up all over the world. One of the most famous ones hit Tasmania back in 1960. Locals found this massive lump of flesh on the shore. There were no eyes, no bones, just 6 weird, floppy, arm-looking things and a body covered in what looked like wiry white hair. Nobody could figure out what it was, so people just started calling it the Tasmanian globster, and it kinda stuck. But this wasn't the first time something gross like this showed up. Back in 1896, two guys walking on a beach in Florida found a massive rotting thing that looked like it had tentacles. It was so big and so rubbery that people thought it might have been a giant octopus. To this day, it's still called the St. Augustine monster. And more recently, in 2003, a giant blob washed up in Chile. It was about 40 feet wide and weighed in at about 13 tons. People were tossing out all kinds of guesses, but eventually DNA tests said it was just a decomposed whale. Kind of a buzzkill, but still, every time one of these things washes up, it just reminds you there's so much of the ocean we haven't seen yet. What the hell else could be down there? Back in October of 2012, a beachcomber named Gino Covacci was taking a stroll along Pompano Beach, Florida, when he came across a big fleshy ball. He did a double take. No, it couldn't be. It looked like a massive sized eyeball. Well, it turns out it was. A big blue eyeball about the size of a softball, just lying in the sand. When news of the find hit the internet, people had all kinds of wild theories. Was it from a giant squid or some unknown sea creature? Cavacci handed the eyeball over to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They sent it off to their research institute in St. Petersburg, and after taking a closer look, they figure it probably belonged to a swordfish. Or used to, I guess is more apt. There were clean cuts around the eye, meaning it had likely been removed by a fisherman and then then discarded at sea. In 2013, a fishing trawler off the Dutch coast snagged something really old in its net. Not a weird creature or a random piece of junk, but a fragment of a human skull from way back at the end of the last ice age. Scientists studied it and figured out it's about 13,000 years old, making it the oldest known modern human remains found in that part of the North Sea. Back then, the place where today there's water was dry land. People lived there, hunted animals like deer and bison, and left behind bones and tools. Over thousands of years, rising sea levels covered the land, so now the seabed holds bits of that ancient world under hundreds of feet of water. They don't know much about the person, but the skull piece belonged to an adult. Scientists also think they might have dealt with anemia at some point in their life. They can tell from tiny marks and the chemistry in the bone. They also determined that the meat from hunts was a major part of this person's diet, which is unsurprising. In November 2023, a guy named Trevor Penny was out magnet fishing in Oxfordshire, England. Magnet fishing being that hobby where you drop a string magnet on a rope into the water and reel up whatever metal sticks to it. Most days, it's boring stuff like bolts and old bike parts, but this day was anything but boring. It started out pretty standard. Trevor was having a slow day. He said he'd mostly pulled up scaffolding poles. Suddenly, the magnet snagged something long and heavy. When he hauled it up to the bank, he didn't immediately realize what he had. As he put it, "I was on the side of the bridge and shouted to a friend on the other side of the bridge, 'What is this?' He came running over. 'It looks like a sword.' Trevor reached out to the experts who confirmed the rusty blade was a Viking-era sword, roughly 1,100 years old, from the height of the Viking Age when Norse warriors were raiding, trading, and settling throughout the British Isles. In 2022, off the coast of Crete in the Mediterranean, divers found an ancient Roman port lying under the shallow waters near a small harbor town. And this wasn't just a few old rocks. There were rows of Roman pottery, tall clay jars used to carry olive oil and wine, sitting exactly where they'd fallen off a ship nearly 2,000 years before. Around the jars, divers also found parts of old docks, walls, and buildings. It was the remnants of a harbor that had sunk beneath the sea. And it gets even cooler, because nearby were fragments from the Minoans, the Bronze Age civilization that ruled Crete thousands of years before the Romans. So, in one spot, you've got layers of history stacked on top of each other. A Roman shipwreck, a sunken port, echoes of a civilization long before even Rome. Last year on a fishing boat in northern Russia, a deep-sea trawler picked up this bulbous, alien-looking thing. The fisherman, Roman Fedortsov, was hauling nets up when a strange, chunky creature slumped onto the railing. It was gray, bloated, almost like a deflated balloon with eyes. But what was it? Scientists identified the creature as a smooth lumpsucker, a deep-sea species we normally never see because it lives so far down. When these fish are yanked up quickly from the high-pressure depths, their bodies can puff up and change shape, making them look completely otherworldly. The rapid pressure change can make their eyes bulge and give them this swollen, surreal look that most people have never seen up close. In 2010, off the coast of Taiwan, a fishing net pulled up a jawbone with teeth still attached. At first, the fishermen probably thought it was some big animal, maybe a whale or a water buffalo, but it was nothing anyone had seen before. It ended up in a museum where scientists started examining it. After some testing, including analyzing proteins that were preserved in the teeth, they realized the jawbone wasn't from a modern animal. It belonged to a Denisovan, one of the ancient human cousins of Neanderthals. These were mysterious humans who lived tens of thousands of years ago, and until this, almost all their fossils had been found in Siberia and the Tibetan Plateau. Suddenly, a piece of deep human history had turned up thousands of miles to the south, meaning Denisovans were more widespread than anyone realized at the time. One evening in January of 2020, a group of guys were fishing at a river in Gary, Indiana, when something completely unexpected turned up on their line. They were pulling up their gear near a bridge when one of them noticed something odd tangled in the water. When they got it up to the surface, they realized it was a grenade. Police later confirmed it, too. In a statement, they said the Porter County Bomb Squad was called in and, quote, took possession of the grenade without incident. To this day, Nobody knows how the grenade wound up in the river.
The first was discovered by a Florida man, and no, not the one who went around eating faces back in 2012, but just a regular Florida guy who probably went fishing from time to time. Around September or October of 2012, the man, whose name is Gino Govecci, was walking along Pompano Beach when he stumbled across something sticking out of the sand. He picked it up and dusted it off, only to realize that in his hand he was holding a giant eyeball, and in really good condition too. Govecci, excited by his discovery, decided to get in touch with a group of Florida researchers to see if he might be able to learn more about the strange abandoned eyeball. However, was slightly disappointed after having done so, as it meant the specimen would have to be relocated to a lab across the state. While scientists were unable to determine exactly who the eye originally belonged to, they believe it to be some type of very large fish. However, Govecci believes its rightful owner to be a squid, but perhaps it's something else altogether. With no confirmation of the eye's true origin, there's really no way to know. Up next, we have a catch that is just about as extreme as it gets. In 2019, two recreational deep-sea fishermen in Charleston, South Carolina, whose names are not available to the public, made a catch that would set them up for life. Behind bars, that is, as what the men pulled up out of the water and onto their boat was a very large package, which they ripped open to reveal a massive amount of a very suspicious and very illicit white powdered substance, if you catch my drift. The two men immediately contacted the Coast Guard, who instructed officers of the North Charleston Police Department to meet the men out in the ocean until both the Coast Guard and the Substance Enforcement Administration were able to arrive. The package was taken into custody of the administration to be tested and its source investigated. Police later revealed that the weight of the catch was about 30 to 50 kilos with a street cost of up to $1.1 million. Up next, we have yet another Florida find. They really just don't have any dull days down there, do they? Anyways, the catch, executed by an unknown fisherman and captured on camera by Steve Bargeron, occurred in 2014 and was even featured on the Florida Fish and Wildlife's Facebook page. So what was the catch? An 18-inch shrimp, which now that I'm saying it out loud, I realize is a complete oxymoron. But anyways, the giant 1.5 foot long animal, according to Florida Fish and Wildlife after having examined the photos, was not just any regular old shrimp. Well, obviously, but rather it was the fast and incredibly strong mantis shrimp, best known for its ability to punch its front feet at a rate of 50 miles per hour, with reports of mantis shrimp knocking out other sea creatures and even breaking through aquarium glass. And considering the massive size of this particular one, I'd say the two men were very lucky that all they received from this animal was a cool story and a few viral photographs. Next, we have another ocean crustacean creature, and unlike the shrimp, which I actually thought was pretty cool, this one just totally creeps me out. This version of a giant isopod, which has been officially named, bear with me, Bathanomus raksasa, nicknamed Darth Vader or sea cockroach, was first captured in a pair in 2018 by a group of research fishermen off the southwestern coast of West Java, Indonesia, during a deep-sea biodiversity expedition. The giant sea bugs, one male and one female, measured in at 14.3 and 11.7 inches, the male being the larger of the two. The large size, as well as their smooth exterior, was what led scientists to originally assume they had discovered a new species. The team also agreed that this discovery was a perfect example of just how little we know about what goes on in the deep sea. A giant-eyed, prehistoric-looking monster brings us to our halfway point today. This creepy creature was captured by Oscar Lundahl, age 19, in 2019, while on a blue halibut fishing expedition. The strange-looking fish, with comically large bulbous eyes and a thin tail, startled the fisher as it emerged from the water. In fact, Oscar claimed that he was so startled he almost jumped right out of his boat upon seeing the creature. The fish was captured by one of 4 hooks on the young man's line at a depth of about 2,600 feet or 800 meters. The fish, which took almost half an hour to pull up to the surface, was later identified to be a ratfish, a distant relative of sharks. However, it looked quite different from ones previously captured in photographs and video. A likely reason for this is the change in pressure levels from the depths of the ocean to its surface. You see, deep sea fish contain fluid sacs within their cells to maintain their form under the extreme deep sea pressure, so when the pressure begins to decrease, the volume of these sacs sacs expand, generally resulting in bulging eyes as well as the death of the animal.
Back in 2016, a group of fishermen off the coast of the Philippines spotted a white yacht just drifting out in the open sea. The sails were half torn and there were no signs of life. They figured it was probably best to check it out, see if anyone needed help. They boarded the boat, began taking a look around, and unfortunately there was no one on board. No one alive, that is. Sitting at a desk in the cabin was the body of a man, still in place like he'd just been working on something. Sunglasses still on, one arm reaching toward the radio. He was eerily well preserved, essentially mummified. The guy was eventually identified as Manfred Fritz Bajeret, a German sailor who'd apparently been living on the water for years. Nobody knows exactly how long the boat had been floating around, but the conditions at sea, heat, dry air, and salt, kept his body strangely preserved. The autopsy showed that he died from a heart attack. They say he'd been sailing solo since his wife passed away a few years earlier. Next up, we have the albino cyclops shark. That sounds like a cryptid, but no, this is real, or at least was real. Back in 2011, this odd creature was sliced from the belly of a pregnant mama dusky shark. It had been caught by a commercial fisherman in the Gulf of California. The little guy was dead when they found it, and odds are it wouldn't have made it anyway, but scientists took a closer look and confirmed that it was real, fully developed and made of legit optical tissue. It wasn't just some weird bulge or mutation, this was an actual eye. They ended up preserving it in a lab, and the photos of it quickly made the rounds online. People couldn't believe that this was real, but it was. A shark expert named Felipe Galvan Magnana said stuff like this is incredibly rare, with fewer than 50 known cases. The condition is called cyclopia, and it's happened in humans too, like a baby girl in Israel who was born with one eye and no nose back in 1982. There's also a pretty famous case of a kitten born in 2006 with one eye and also no nose. This next story is incredibly bizarre. From a now deleted Reddit user comes the story of the lightning strike. When I was 13 to 14, my brother participated in fishing tournaments, and he had to train every weekend, so sometimes me and my dad went with him to nearby lakes and rivers. Neither me or my dad could fish, so it was usually pretty boring. We couldn't talk for hours, otherwise fish got scared, and oftentimes we had to stand in the pouring rain. This one time in September, my brother was fishing in this river bend in the middle of nowhere. It was cloudy and thundering, and we were expecting rain soon. About 3 hours in, we saw a figure in the distance approaching. He looked like an adult man, dark jumper and jeans, and he carried what seemed to be a collapsed rod. The weird thing is, he didn't have a basket or anything, just the rod. We watched as he positioned himself about 600 meters away from us and unfolded the rod to full 7 meters. From the way it bent, I would have guessed it was a carbon fiber. He just stood there motionless. A few minutes later, a lightning bolt shot down from the sky and hit the rod. We heard this loud noise like wood splintering. We rushed over to see if he was okay, but we found no one. A man got hit by lightning and disappeared. Back in December of 2022, someone out magnet fishing in Kentucky pulled something a little more intense than what they were used to finding. Just a live grenade, and not a hand grenade though. This was the kind you'd fire from a grenade launcher. They were dropping their magnet off a bridge when they snagged it, and once they realized what they were dealing with, the police were called in. Cops shut down the bridge and surrounding roads while a bomb squad rolled in from Fort Campbell. Turns out the grenade was still live, and because it had been sitting in the water for who knows how long, it was way too unstable to move, so instead of risking it, they detonated it right there on the spot. The blast was loud enough that people all over town heard it. Police ended up putting out a statement just to let everyone know what had actually happened. As for how the thing ended up in the water to begin with, nobody knows. Speaking of explosives though, in November of 2024, a Dutch dredging vessel working off the coast of the Netherlands ended up pulling something way heavier than expected from the North Sea. It was a 2,000-pound US aerial bomb from World War II. It It was still very much intact and packed with explosives. Basically, someone on board noticed the thing wedged into the equipment, and once they realized what they were looking at, they got the military involved immediately. The Dutch Defense Explosive Ordnance Disposal Service, or EOD, was called to the scene. They took over from there and managed to safely detonate the explosive. The whole thing was handled professionally, but yeah, pretty unsettling to think that for a few minutes, that crew was just going about their day with a live World War II explosive that could have gone off at any minute. This isn't exactly rare either. The North Sea is still full of leftover explosives and all kinds of junk from the war, and every once in a while, fishermen or construction crews get unlucky and find something like this stuck in their nets or gear. In 1996, the F-174, a ship carrying migrants, sank off the coast of Portopalo, Italy. There were only 30 survivors. The rest of the passengers, around 283, sank with the ship. That same year, fishermen off the coast of Portopalo, Italy started pulling up more than just fish. At first, it was just a body part here, a piece of clothing there, then entire corpses started showing up in their nets. Now, instead of reporting these gruesome finds, most of them did something unthinkable. They threw the bodies back. Now, they weren't just being callous, they were afraid. If they reported the bodies, their boats could be seized for investigation, their livelihoods put on hold indefinitely, so they made the decision to keep quiet. Then in 2001, fisherman Salvatore Lupo found a body part with an ID card. When he alerted the authorities, they didn't take him seriously. They didn't want to deal with the mess or lose their fishing season, so they just ignored the reports. Journalist Giovanni Maria Bellu eventually investigated the wreck and filmed the site using an underwater vehicle in 2001. The footage showed the damaged ship with skeletons still inside, but since the ship sank in international waters, Italian authorities couldn't really do anything about it, and for years the disaster was buried. And when the story started to come out, many people, especially in the fishing community, weren't too thrilled. Some even blamed those who tried to expose the truth, thinking it would ruin their town's reputation. Now, what's the creepiest creature you can picture pulling up while fishing? Does it look anything like this? Well, if this is what you're imagining, then be glad you're not this next guy. A fisherman was left terrified after encountering a strange sea creature while fishing in southern Thailand on November 30th of 2020. Desha Srichai pulled in this icky-looking creature with long, spindly black legs that moved like a spider. He was shocked to see it among the fish and quickly recoiled in horror, throwing the net to the ground. He poked the creature with a stick before deciding to capture the moment on his phone. At first, I thought it was just a twig, but then the thing started to move. I was scared and leapt back, Desha said. He showed the footage to his friends who helped him identify it. It's believed to be a dark black feather starfish, and these things really do seem like alien creatures, not just because of how creepy they look, but get this, if those spindly arms are cut, they can regenerate. Kill it with fire. Now he didn't though, he did the right thing and just knocked it back into the water with the stick. This news just came out the other day. Off the coast of the Philippines, fishermen made an unexpected discovery when they hauled in this mysterious ocean predator with large eyes. Originally intended for a local fish market, the creature caught the attention of visiting scientists, and it turned out to be a first of its kind find. And it wasn't the only one. The researchers were focused on cartilaginous fish like sharks and rays. They were buying specimens directly from fishermen to study. Over 2 years, they managed to document 14 different species, including a sandbar shark, which was a big deal. This was the first verified sighting of this species in the Philippines. Sandbar sharks are vulnerable to overfishing, so it was important to get the data. They also found a pair of Philippine guitarfish, which are critically endangered, and a few other species they hadn't come across before. So overall, a pretty successful 2-year study. From a now deleted Reddit user comes the story of the black shape in the fog. I've been wanting to share this for a while. It happened a few years ago when I was working as a deckhand on a fishing boat off the coast of Alaska. We were about 30 miles off, and it was one of those mornings where the fog is so thick you can barely see a few feet in front of you. Anyway, we were hauling in a net when I noticed something odd. At first I thought it was just the fog playing tricks, but then it started to come into focus, an enormous black shape, slowly coming out from the mist. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. It was massive and totally out of place, just suspended in the water, not really moving at all. The whole crew noticed it and just froze. We didn't know what we were looking at. It wasn't a boat or a whale or anything that made sense. It was like a shadow, but solid. It felt like it was watching us too. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the fog cleared a bit and it was gone. It was like it disappeared into thin air. I've never been able to explain it, and no one on the boat could either. I still get chills thinking about it. Next up is the Kamagon, a mysterious sea creature believed to live in the Antarctic waters near New Zealand. Weird thing about the Kamagon is that no one has ever seen its full body, only its head. But this head, if it really is a head, is described as being pretty strange. Large, bulbous, with two big round eyes and a set of nostrils, or maybe another set of eyes underneath. The most famous sighting happened on April 28th of 1974. The Japanese fishing crew were out near the Littleton Peninsula, and around 7 p.m. the entire crew, all 28 of them, saw the creature's head pop out of the water. It was about 1.5 meters tall, and it just hung around for a bit, almost like it was checking them out. After a while, it dove back into the ocean. The captain was so rattled by the experience, he made a sketch of the creature, which hit newspapers. Eventually, the mysterious creature was dubbed the Kamagon, meaning hippo monster. A fisherman named Max Manus made a chilling discovery last year while out fishing with friends off the coast of Florida. They spotted this small upturned blue boat drifting alone in the middle of the ocean. He posted a video of the find on TikTok. It turned out the boat had been abandoned after a group of 8 fishermen ran into trouble around 55 kilometers offshore. The boat capsized, and the crew used an EPIRB, or emergency position indicating radio beacon, to alert the Coast Guard. They spent around 3 hours in the water clinging to an esky before being rescued. Luckily, no injuries were reported. By the time Max and his friends found the boat, it had been adrift for a few days. They were about 80 kilometers out from Venice Beach, Florida, when they came across it. It was an eerie thing to come across, but at least this story ended happily. In 2022, off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island, a fishing crew pulled up something way bigger than their usual catch, a World War II depth charge. It was a 520-pound explosive packed with 267 pounds of TNT, snagged about 4 miles offshore while they were dragging their nets. The crew immediately called the Coast Guard, who brought in the Navy's explosive ordnance disposal team from Newport. The Navy took the device and safely detonated it underwater, about a mile from the shore the next morning. The depth charge was from a 1945 naval battle, when U.S. ships hunted and sank a German U-boat, dropping nearly 200 depth charges into the water. One of them never went off, until this fishing trip nearly 80 years later. In September 2025, off the northern coast of Kerala, India, a fisherman named Russell was hauling in his net when something unexpectedly heavy and solid caught his attention. When he pulled it up, he found 2 brass serpent idols, each weighing around 11 pounds. These were not ordinary trinkets. They were detailed, solid figures, the kind usually kept in temples. Russell didn't know what to do with them, so he took them back to shore and handed them to police, who had no idea how they would have ended up in the sea. So they've been investigating all possibilities. There is a possibility they were stolen temple relics. Serpent idols in Kerala are often connected to traditional worship of snake deities. Finding them tangled in a fishing net is extremely rare. Along the Severn estuary in Wales, a group of traditional fishermen were out at low tide, and something weird showed up in the mud. They weren't expecting treasure, just the usual nets and debris, but instead they pulled up ancient fishing baskets, hand-woven from willow and hazel. Martin Morgan, one of the local fishery leaders, explained how these things worked, saying the baskets would have been baited and pegged to the estuary bed at low tide. The catch would have been green eels and lamprey. Storms had shifted the sand and mud, and that's what finally brought the baskets back to the surface after hundreds of years underwater. Experts say other baskets from the same spot date back to the 12th to 15th centuries, so these are basically time capsules from the Middle Ages. The fishermen were pretty stunned, holding up pieces of history they didn't even know they were fishing for. In 2017, the New Bedford Fishing Heritage Center in Massachusetts invited local fishermen to bring in all the bizarre and downright unbelievable things they'd pulled up in their nets over the years. As you can imagine, there were some stories. The center's executive director, Laura Orleans, talked about some of the objects fishermen had hauled out of the deep, saying, quote, "Over the years, I've heard about all the crazy stuff people have pulled up, from torpedoes to human body parts to airplane wings to fossils, everything, even including a kitchen sink at what they called the first Unusual catch day, crews brought in their weirdest hauls so maritime archaeologists could help identify them. Some of the items were so unexpected and old that researchers couldn't immediately identify them. Some were small, some were huge, but it all reminded everyone that fishing nets don't always just catch fish. Sometimes they haul up long-forgotten mysteries from the past. In the summer of 2023, out on the North Sea off the west coast of the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark, fisherman René Kloster was doing a routine trawl when his net snagged something heavy, very heavy. A 26-foot undetonated World War II torpedo weighing over 2.5 tons. Kloster posted about the find on Facebook, saying, "It's not entirely harmless to be a fisherman. This morning we caught this torpedo about 8 meters long and approximately 2,500 kg. He added that it would be detonated about 3 miles off the channel and that it was huge, the biggest he'd ever seen. He later confirmed authorities did blow it up safely. The torpedo was lowered back down and handled by professionals who detonated it away from the coast so no one else could accidentally haul it up again. This wasn't Kloster's first torpedo though. He said it was actually the third he'd pulled up in his nets. From Reddit user SeaDogSam77 comes this next story. Was out near a shallow sandbar off the Oregon coast a few months ago. Just me and my old drift boat. Pulled in my net like normal, expecting crab traps or seaweed, and something caught my eye. Tangled at the bottom was a small, smooth bundle of something wrapped in seaweed. At first I thought it was just driftwood or trash, but as I untangled it, I realized it was a small carved figurine about the size of my hand, with a face etched into it. The wood was old, dark, and smelled like the ocean had soaked it for decades. The detail was unnerving. The eyes were tiny pits. I didn't know where it came from, and before I could even think of taking it home, the tide pulled the net sideways and it slipped back into the water, gone before I could grab it. I've been back to that spot many times since, but nothing else like it has ever shown up.